When Nick Brandt was in college, his faith grew tremendously because of the male mentors and disciplers he had in his life. Whether you're a mom of a son, whether you're married to a husband, there's something you can learn about mentoring and discipling young men. And we're going to find out today when we talk to Nick Brandt right now. Hey, Nick, it is so good to have you back. And I'm really excited because we had you not long ago on a show about millennials. And one of the things that I learned is that you're just really passionate about mentoring young men.
Yeah.
So first start out by reminding our audience who you are and what you do.
Yes. Well, I am a late 20-something that is a millennial and actually works at a church as a college pastor. So I work day in and day out with 18 to 25-year-olds, those that are right in college and even a few years out of college. And I get to walk relationally with these students and these young professionals day in and day out.
And you have a real passion for men.
Yeah.
And tell me about that. Something that started with you even in college, or?
Yeah. So this passion, I think, was birthed by God and was really developed at a young age in college. It was kind of a result of my circumstances. I came out of a very kind of broken family, really troubled times of a family that was separated by divorce, had a pretty nasty divorce, and split things up, and kind of left me in a place of feeling pretty down and out and pretty just kind of searching for answers, understanding my purpose, what my life was supposed to be like. Got involved in a lot of things I probably shouldn't have gotten involved in high school and early college. And one night heard this guy speak, and he shared really a message of hope and a message that really caught my attention, caught my eye. The way he talked about God and the way he talked about Jesus blew my mind. I was like, I never heard somebody talk about that. Like, he knows this guy. It was more or less like, it was much less about him and much more like he knew him and walked with him.
Like, this is a friend of mine?
Like, this is a friend of mine. I was like, nobody's ever done this before. And so I leaned into this guy. I went up to him and I said, hey, man, you don't know me from Adam, but can I meet with you? And can we talk? And the guy was like, yeah, when do you want to do it? So he met me at a Tuesday at 12 o'clock at a Starbucks near campus, and I just said, I want to talk to you about life. And the best thing about this guy is he never once pushed spirituality or hey, Jesus, you got to talk about Jesus. He just never shoved anything down my throat. He took a genuine interest in me, and a relationship developed, and from there, the next 4 years of my life really were turned around because of somebody who cared about me, cared about what my life was going to look like, and really was bold enough to speak truth to me.
And then, if I remember correctly, you said that you were actually with a group of peers, and you really fed off of each other as well, too.
So one of the things that he really pushed was community, and understanding that life is meant to be lived out with people and not in isolation. The dangers of isolation, the dangers, especially in college, you can just pull yourself back and be so in a corner. And so anyways, I ended up living in a house full of, honestly, way too many guys, but honestly doing life with a bunch of guys and getting to know them, living in close quarters, and they played a huge role in my life as well.
So now this is what you're doing for others, right? So tell me kind of how you got into this.
Yeah, so it really, I actually, out of college, I went and followed a couple other dreams and passions that I had, but kind of felt like my purpose was really not being fulfilled necessarily. It was more or less this kind of internal burning inside of me that there was something more I could be doing, that I kept asking the question, what's the highest stakes? What's the highest stakes I could be leveraging my life for? And I couldn't settle on, I couldn't settle on what I was doing. And not that it wasn't important. I believe that every job plays its part. But for me, I couldn't stand traveling 4 days a week, staring at a hotel wall at night, thinking, man, I was built to be relational. There are things about all of us that were built to be relational, and I wanted to lean into these relationships. And so, man, I just started searching. I started thinking about my past life, and when I was in college, and one of the things in college that really played a big part was where I started actually caring for younger guys in college. Brett, the guy who mentored me in college, he pushed me to do that. And when I did that, found a lot of freedom, found a lot of life and a lot of purpose, and it really shifted my perspective.
That's great. I'm really excited. I know you're so passionate about it. What we're going to do is we're going to take a break now, but when we come back, I want you to tell us what's different about mentoring young men and what kinds of things you've learned over the past few years. Mentoring young men, whether you're married to one or you have one as a son, there's something you can learn from Nick. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Today we're talking about mentoring young men. Whether you have a son, whether you have a husband, whether you know a young man, I think the things that Nick has to say are really important. You are doing this for a living. I mean, it's partly your job, but it was your passion first.
Yeah, it was. And it plays out way past my living work hours. You know, it definitely does. It's a passion because of the really the effect that somebody else's life had on mine, and understanding the power of an older influencer really leaning in and saying, I see something in you, calling things out, and really that kind of pushed me forward.
So tell me how this works out. Like, how do you, is this like a formal thing? They come at 3 o'clock, or is it?
Great question. It's not. I mean, the way that it works out for me is that we have a vehicle. So what I mean by that is there's something that honestly brings people in, and they come in. And so for me, I work at a church. For me, I work at a church, and we have different events and things that we use to help draw people in. But from there, the hope is that they would engage with either different adult leaders, or they would engage with myself, or even some of our female leaders, and they would start to develop a relationship. And so what I mean by that is honestly taking a genuine interest in their life. I push all the time for our leaders and for people in our church asking how they can do this to take a vested interest. Invite one of these 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds into your life. Call them over to your house. Have a conversation with them. Take them to dinner. Take them to lunch. Take them to coffee, and just get to know them. You don't have to push on them really spirituality and things. That stuff's going to naturally come out, especially in this generation. It's naturally going to be a question that comes on the forefront of their mind. But the question is, do we care about people? This is the overarching question in everything involving relationships and discipleships, caring for people, spirituality. Do we care for people, or do we have an agenda? And I'm telling you, in this generation, they can smell it a mile away. If you're a guy standing on stage and you're trying to say something, they're going to smell it. But if you care about them, people know that. They can experience it.
So if I come to them with a purpose, like I want you to say this prayer, or I want you to do this attendance thing or whatever, that's not going to be helpful.
A checklist mentality of faith is just over with, or we're done with that. And so what we're looking for is actually relationships. We're looking for developing genuine care and being invested in lives. You know, Jesus was a person and a guy who came for what we know from heaven to earth. He decided to leave perfection and come into a mess. That's what we're called to do. We're called to leave our own comfortability, go outside the box and enter into a mess. And I'm a result of somebody who did that, of somebody who walked into my mess. And I was really messy in college, by the way. And I'm not talking about clothes on the ground either, but I was really messy. And he entered into that mess and just said, I want to walk with you. I want to know you. I want to talk about your life.
So this, I'm assuming he wasn't your age. You're a nice-looking, good-looking young man. I'm sure lots of people would be like, oh, I'd love to hang out with him. But this was an older man who had a married family.
45 years old, had kids, a wife. Had been doing it for a while, had been a campus pastor for a while. But I think, honestly, Jen, that's a misconception a lot. Does it have to be a campus pastor? Why does it have to be
a professional? Hire them to
Some people out here that are watching this, they work in an office right now. And in that office, there is a 22-year-old, 23, 24-year-old, even someone younger than them, maybe it might be even a 30-year-old, that honestly, that person has some life experience. Now, they can have a mission in mind. They can have a mission that they want to care for that person, but I'm telling you, it begins with the relationship, and so pursuing them. And he would spend time with me. He would talk about my life. He would call me into his home, bring me into his home. I would have dinners at his home. I'd go to his boys' practices. And it wasn't like this formal, okay, sit down, let's have our coffee. Okay, let's talk today about this thing. It wasn't any of that. It was more or less,
come hang out.
Let's have life discussion. Let's talk about it.
I can see that would be huge. One of the things that I've heard is like college students love to be around adults, just not their parents. And so to have somebody else kind of speaking their life, to go to somebody else, you know, especially if they're on a college campus where they're eating dorm food and things, to be able to just be asked to do that. And I assume the same is true now, where a young professional is getting a job. It may not be in a place where they grew up or where they went to school. It could be anywhere. And so to have somebody who says, come over and pet my dog and eat with our kids.
Well, and here's the thing, is they all have questions. So even if you're that young professional that's in a workplace right now, you're wondering, how do I move forward in this job? How do I gain more value here or provide more value here? And so they have all these questions, and there's somebody who's older, somebody who's been through a little more life experience, that if they would just move out of comfort zone, if they would just move out of caring and really being concerned with what they're going to think, that they would actually know that they're going to make an impact for a long term in their life.
Do you have to be somebody who has like a perfect house and cooks really good dinners and that kind of thing to have them over, or is it just...
No, and actually, it's great. I'm glad you brought that up. You know, I think there's a misconception that we have to be perfect. And you know what? Again, going back to the I can smell BS from a mile away, people know if you're faking something. They know, millennials know that if you are trying to put on a front, I heard something recently, there is much more power in you being transparent in your weakness than you being the perfect Superman with the cape that's got it all figured out. They want to see the mess ups. How are you dealing with them, Jen? How are you handling it? How have you handled this in the past? And so show some chinks in the armor, you know? That's my favorite thing to do, is to sit with a group of guys and be like, hey, here's the deal. I love that we're talking about life today, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to fail you. And looking them in the eyes and telling them that, it freaks them out. They're like, who says that? What pastor comes to me and tells me they're going to fail me?
Well, it's okay because they know what their failures are. And so to have somebody else admit them makes it okay for them to say.
Relatability.
Like,
Absolutely.
So one of the things, just reminded me of, you and I actually attended a conference, and at the conference they talked about the fact that it's really hard for young men to date, young men and women to date these days, that they're used to group dates, and there's a lot of, you know, social media and texting and that kind of thing. So something as simple as asking a girl out on a date can be really hard for a guy to do. And they said the best thing that we, as our parents or an older generation can do, is tell them about our failures, what happened when we asked somebody out and it went really badly, so that gives them the courage to know it can go badly and I'll still make this through it.
It's kind of like the, you know, try and try again, try and fail and try and fail, and don't be afraid of failures. And that's what I think a lot of time needs to be spoken to this generation, is not to be scared of messing up. And, you know, that do we want to go intentionally out there and try to do things that are going to really put us at stake, of, you know, our morals being, you know, being at stake here, that are going to crumble. But no, we don't want to do that. But we do want to say, hey, get off the phone, stop staring at the screen, stop texting a girl. I want to say this all the time to guys, stop texting a girl. Let's have a conversation with her like a man, and let's step up and be not scared to step up and have those conversations, and encourage them to do that, encourage them beyond the screen, and to honestly take a risk or two.
One of the things that you said to me, you know, I'm familiar with mentoring and doing that kind of things, and I have a son, and I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but you feel like there's some special needs that young men have, that they have anxieties that no one else is really thinking about, and that's how am I going to, you know, I've got to get good grades in college, so I get a good job, I have a job that supports a family, I have to, you know, they have all of this anxiety that may be real or may not be, but that they're carrying around with them. And then after we spoke about that, I spoke to my son about it. He was a freshman in college. I'm like, I know he's not thinking about this. He so was. All of this stuff was on his mind, even at that age. I'm like, just enjoy college, you know, but he couldn't. He's thinking those steps ahead. So talk a little bit about that. And
well, you know, it's interesting because there is a lot of pressure, I think, that a lot of guys, young men, will take on themselves. I think they see, and we've talked a little bit about this, even the last time I was here, we talked about this with millennials. They see their parents. They see that their parents have worked really hard. They have maybe the car, the lake house, or whatever it might be that they've earned, and they've worked hard for it, and they feel the pressure to do that. But then they're struggling in the middle of an economy that had been broken at one point, and they've been struggling in a society where the job markets were changing. It was hard to find jobs that were paying well, that they could actually afford on their own. And so you're seeing a lot of this pressure come around on them, that they feel, and they're thinking about, whether you believe it or not, they're thinking about their wife. They're thinking about, I'm gonna have kids, I gotta do something to build a family and build a life, and then I gotta satisfy mom and dad, who are saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, and if you just do this, then you'll get a job, and you'll please everybody. And so there's a sense of that pressure of, am I amounting to something? Then you throw in maybe the struggles in college. You throw in a lot of the mistakes that you and I have learned from when we were in college, and you feel the shame, and the shame that holds them back, and the things that they're like, I'm not amounting to what I should be, and they feel that. They're not having conversations as much with people to be able to talk about that. It's all part of why it's important to have somebody to walk through this with.
Yeah, and being real about it. I know of two kids, and again, I wouldn't have thought about this until it came up in those contexts, and I was more aware of it from our conversations, but two kids who two young men who looked up to their parents and said, I could never be what my parents are. You know, the parents in one situation were both lawyers, graduated from a good college, and this kid didn't have any interest in that and just felt like, I'm just never going to amount to that. Another one who's, you know, again, two professionals, one was a doctor and one was a psychologist, and the kid looked up to him and said, there's no way I can amount to that. And it almost made them not want to try. And I had a conversation with one of those parents, and we were talking about the fact that sometimes I just need to say I'm sorry to my son. Or one of the things I've said to him before is that, you know, what you do may disappoint me, but it still may be the right thing for you to do. And I remember the surgeon saying, like, I never thought about that before. I never thought about how hard it would be for my kid to never see me fail or say I'm sorry and try to live up to that.
Well, what you're talking about is, we see this in the extremes of parents who are trying to create these trophy kids at times. And I ask parents that all the time. I mean, I say, are you okay with the fact that your son wants to do X, Y, and Z, and they don't want to do what you think they should do? Are you okay with that? And you find a lot of times the pressure is really, I mean, it's fair.
Right.
They have that because of the parents putting that on them.
Put it on that, right.
And so I tell parents, you need to take a role in the life of your child. You need to speak and affirm them. You need to overly affirm the things that are going on in their world that you are proud of. They need to hear that from dad. Men need to hear that from dad.
From other men.
Dad has got to speak. I am proud of you for this. I have to be okay with being in touch emotionally with what I think of my son. And that doesn't happen. And when they don't hear that, that's where a lot of this question, this doubt comes from.
Right, yeah, and I think on the parent side of it, is sometimes it's just ignorance or not being aware of it, you know, that we're putting pressure on him. I remember one time my son was coming out of high school, and every day when I picked him up, I said, you know, would you have homework tonight? And because that dictated our schedule. You know, do we have dinner early, not? Sure. Does he have to do this? You have to get together a study group, you know, so it just, that was how our evening was planned. And then finally, like 3 or 4 months into his high school career, we had a conversation about, do I put pressure on you academically? And if you had asked me, I'd say, no, I don't. I'm like totally okay with whatever. I want him to work up to his standards or whatever. But when I asked him, he said, yeah, every day when I get in the car, the first thing you say. And to me, that was about a schedule, but to him, that felt like academic pressure. Like I was questioning that. And so as adults, as parents, sometimes we don't even realize the pressures we're putting on our kids. And when we live a life trying to be perfect, you know, to set a good example, we should be showing that we're not such a good example. And
and you see what affected that and caused positivity to come out of that was a conversation. You had a conversation where you asked the question, and well done, because that's what needs to happen. Is we need your kids feel safe to even answer you. It's kind of that old adage when you get in a conversation with somebody and you say, "Is this a safe way to have a conversation right now? Can we really have a safe conversation?" And the fact that you had that is important.
Right. Yeah, because there's probably just as many that I didn't or wasn't aware of, but so I don't want to do it that way. But that's important, I think, is being intentional about that. And I think what you're saying, part of with dealing with young men is doing that, is focusing on being intentional about the conversations, but not with an agenda. There's a fine line between that, right?
Sure, there is, and that's you know, that's the number one thing I tell a lot of our adult leaders that are serving our church and they're caring for younger people. I say, just please don't have an agenda with them. People are not a project. We're not trying to fix somebody. I can't fix somebody. I can have conversations, but I believe that God is the ultimate fixer. I think He's the ultimate healer, and I think Jesus is the one that's going to do that for them. And so my job is to have the conversations, to be a person of grace and truth with them, to not be scared to have those conversations, but honestly, to take a vested interest in what matters to you. What do you love? And why do you love it? And let me help you navigate from my experiences in life and things I've gone through, and then let me point you towards something that I think is going to be really helpful for you if you're open to hearing about it.
So practically, tell me some ways that you do this. I know, for example, that you will invest in like an entire baseball team or something where you sort of take them on. Tell me about some of the things that you do.
Practically speaking, I'll use that group right there they're talking about. I show up to their games. I'm part of them. Is it time consuming? Yes. Does it take energy? Yes. Do I have the time for it? I mean, some people in my life would probably say you don't. You know, I'm sure there's some areas that maybe aren't as, you know, maybe I'm not as strong in other friendships because I'm choosing to have some select close friends that are close to me, and then I'm also choosing to pursue guys outside of my work time and be a part of what they're doing. So what does that do when you show up? I mean, it's like for a son, when your dad shows up to his baseball game, he's like, that guy's proud of me. Look at him. And all of a sudden, you're earning trust. So I walk with them through things. I show up to things that they're at. I ask them questions. I ask them what's going on in their world. I do that over food. What college student, what 18, 25-year-old does not want a bite to eat?
Especially if you're buying.
Right? Sometimes we don't do anything. Sometimes we just go have fun. Sometimes we just go hit up a movie, or we go to a game ourselves. Sometimes I just have them over for just to hang at my house. I open the doors to my home. That's another big thing. I want them to know that my home, mi casa, su casa, man. It's you want to come here, you want to study here, come on, let's do it. Let's happen. It's for you. And so practically those are things. I remember things that are important to them. That's another big thing. I think, again, a true test of are we really listening to people is what are we notating? I mean, if I'm hearing you, I'm going to remember some things. I'm going to, you know, and honestly, sometimes I got to get a little crazy. I write things in my contacts of my notes on my phone.
That's smart, though, because after a long day of conversations at work and whatever else, you could forget things.
So I'll go to Joe and I'll click, well, Joe loves this, or Joe loves this, or Joe maybe might have told me in a conversation earlier in the week, he's got a test that he's really worried about on Friday. Do you know how much it means to Joe that on Friday at 7 o'clock, I'm going to send him a text and say, hey, man, how did that test go? Dude, that conversation was over 2 weeks ago. How do you remember that? I remember because you said it was important to you.
So practically, you're taking notes, you're putting things on your calendar.
And not in front of them.
And,
Why?
no.
Because I don't, again,
Tell me again,
hey, wait 1 second. No, because not in front of them, but yes,
After
I am doing my diligence afterwards. Because why? It's drawn from a sense of care.
Yeah.
It's not drawn from a sense of...
Because you would do it if you remembered, but you know I'm not going to remember by next Friday or whatever it is. So putting those things in your calendar. And another thing that you do, just as a tickler reminder of the people that are really important to you or that you're really trying to invest in, I think is the right word, or trying to love well, you put them in your quick dials in your phone.
So I have a number of guys who, and this is an important conversation because you have to decide how much time do I have and how many people can I logically invest in. You know, again, from my worldview as a believer of Jesus, you know, Christ modeled this where he had 72 at large that he really cared for, and then it dwindled down to this 12 that he was really close with, but then he had his 3. Then he had the ones that he was really walking with, and then he had one that was like his best friend. And so it's kind of a similar model in our lives, right? We have those concentric circles, and I ask the question of our leaders all the time. I said, well, only you know how many you can take on. It is better for you to walk with a lower number of people than to walk with way too many, and honestly, you just aren't showing up because you know why? There's a lot of people in their life that aren't showing up. They don't need another person that's not showing up. So for me, I know how many I have, and I put them. They're actually in my favorites list on my phone. That's what Apple calls it. It's a favorites list. And I click that list, and I just scroll through, and I ask the question on Monday mornings. It's on my calendar. I say, God, who is it that you need me to spend time with this week? Who do you want me to be with this week? When I do that, I believe God's going to speak to me. I know that this guy, I'm looking at the names. I need to spend a little time with him. I haven't seen him in a while. I have a list of guys. I'm thinking through them. I'm following up with them. I'm checking in on them.
So that's great. So it's purposely limiting the number, and then it's being intentional about contacting and following up and doing that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Those are huge kinds of things. Any other kinds of tips like that you have done or taught your leaders to do?
Well, you know, I teach them that. I mean, it really does honestly just revolve around relationship. I don't know. I mean, I think about this question. I ask them this question all the time too. I say, what would you want to happen in your life? You know, God says we need to love people as we love ourselves. That was the second. He said the greatest commandment: love the Lord God with all your heart, then love others as you love yourself. So maybe one question as a mentor you need to ask is, am I loving myself well? Am I caring for myself well? Because if you're not caring for you well, then you really can't care for other people very well. I think about that with dads a lot of times. I go, Dad, you care for your own spiritual life? Do you walk and care for your own spiritual life? How are you going to care about your son's eternality, where he's headed, if you don't care about your heart?
So we're talking directly about mentoring young men, but there could be dads out there who are thinking like, yeah, maybe I need to do more of that with my son, but maybe they need to do more of those kinds of conversations with their friends or their coworkers.
Yeah, I mean, again, how can you teach somebody or walk with somebody in something if you're not willing to do it yourself somewhere?
I remember my husband has eaten lunch with the same coworker for 25 years. And one day I asked him if the coworker asked a specific intimate question. Like I said, oh, what is his goal or what is his need? He's like, I don't know. I said, you've eaten lunch with him for 25 years and you don't know? And he goes, well, men don't talk about that.
That's so funny. I actually have a story about that. I had a friend of mine, a really close friend of mine, that he came over to the house. We were painting the fence. We were working on the fence. He came home and his wife asked him the question. She said, hey, Travis, what did you and Nick talk about? He said, we didn't talk. And he said, did you have a good time? He's like, we had a great time. She was like, how did you have a great time but you didn't talk? And he realized, I mean, sometimes guys are just shoulder-to-shoulder people. And, you know, men and women are face-to-face, right? And I don't want to generalize all that, but I do want to say that men do want to have these conversations. I just don't think sometimes they know how. And I think we need to somehow maybe either get into small groups at church or get into a community group at church to be able to try to figure out how can I at least talk a little bit about what's going on in here and what's going on in here.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. And so part of it just starts with being brave, being able to share those kinds of things. We're talking about how you can mentor young men, but I think this applies to anyone. It applies to friends, it applies to coworkers, it applies to women as well. So stay tuned and we're going to come back and finish this conversation. Welcome back. I'm here with Nick Brandt. We're talking about mentoring young men and discipling young men. And one of the things we hadn't really talked about are maybe some resources, and especially online, since they're spending so much time online. Are there things that can happen with that?
Well, it's exciting because a lot of times people think, well, millennials are so stuck on their phones, they're so stuck on technology, and they're just not engaged in relationships. Well, there's so much positivity that has come out of this. I mean, there are more resources at our tips and at our fingertips than ever before, Jen. You can go online, and there are websites that are developed. I mean, websites I use all the time, like desiringguide.org or the YouVersion Bible app. I mean, people are holding the Bible more in their hands than ever before. So I encourage people all the time. I say, ask your pastors, ask the people that you see doing this, what resources do you use? Don't be afraid of technology. Don't be afraid of going online and looking for things that can be really helpful.
Yeah, so we might see our sons, for example, not reading the Bible, but the truth is they have it on their phone, and they may be reading we don't even know.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely. And even the way that, I mean, the amount of content that is out is higher than ever before. There's really not an excuse. I mean, honestly, we're talking about how can I mentor people further? What can I do? I mean, Google. Get online and Google. You know, there's so much at your fingertips for you to figure out what you can do to invest.
That's incredible. So if I were just to sum up this conversation, I think what I'm hearing you saying is that to mentor young men, part of it is we need to be intentional about deciding to do that and committing the time to doing it, but we need to not have an agenda. We need to really love these men, and part of that is just investing in them, finding out who they are, what makes them tick, what makes them happen, and then being able to just sort of gently, you know, give resources or things to help them discover some of it on their own, or to listen to their questions and to do that.
Or to walk with them through it.
So it's not about coming in with a predetermined plan. It's not about
having it all figured out. I think that most people will think, I don't have this figured out. I don't know what to say. And what we're saying today is first take the step to care for yourself, then find something where you can become a mentor and lean in and be part. Grab the resources, grab the materials, and lean in.
That's awesome. And just love them. Nobody wants anything more than to be loved, and love them with Jesus' love. Thanks for being a part of our show today.